as I stood at that border as an 11-year-old, I made a decision that the way out of this will be if I get a good education. He recognized an opportunity, which was people from neighboring former communist country coming to Turkey. I will need to get a good education, and it defines everything I do today. We started a business later on, but even that business has education in its heart. My dad worked in construction, illegal cab driver, anything to be able to afford rent, basically. I recall not having any water. The place that we rented didn't have any running water, no electricity, no heat. No is the beginning of negotiation. No is when the business starts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Business Unbound for this week. This is the show where we dive into conversations with visionary leaders from every corner of the globe to bring you insights, inspiration, and the real stories behind success. I'm your host, Florian Hoff. Today I'm speaking with someone whose story challenges everything we know about entrepreneurship and success, Dr. Neri Karra Sillaman. Neri was born into a persecuted Turkish ethnic minority in communist Bulgaria, and at just 11 years old, she and her family were forced to flee her home country. They initially settled in a refugee camp in Istanbul, where she and her family began building a business in the leather industry. That business, Neri Karra, didn't stay small. It became a global luxury brand now in its 25th years, and they are manufacturing for Prada, Gucci, 𝐘𝐚𝐭, and other leading Italian fashion houses. But Neri isn't just an entrepreneur. She's a scholar too. She earned a PhD from Cambridge and taught at many leading universities, including the University of Oxford. She discovered an interesting statistic as part of her research. Immigrants have founded or co-founded almost 50% of the Fortune 500 companies. Neri wanted to know, why is that? Is it grit? Is it luck? Or is it a replicable strategy? In today's conversation, we discuss her key insights. We will unpack the immigrant advantage by looking at the specific 8 principles that she identified, from reframing rejection to pure luck. Everything that allows ambitious professionals and individuals to build disproportionately successful businesses. Most importantly, Neri and I discuss how you, whether you have an immigrant background or not, can apply these exact same mindset shifts and strategies to regain agency, drive innovation, and build something that lasts. This is not just a story about overcoming adversity. Today's conversation is a masterclass in the economics of longevity and a strategic playbook of the world's most resilient founders. This is Business Unbound. Let's dive in. Quick moment of honesty. Business Unbound is brand new. We are in the early days of something that I genuinely believe in, a show dedicated to real conversations with forward-thinking business leaders and inspiring individuals who are having a real impact on this world. And that's where you come in. I need your help. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, please follow the show and leave a rating. It sounds simple, but it shows that this content matters and it directly impacts how many ambitious professionals like you discover these conversations. When you're helping me, you're not just supporting a show. Here's what you're really doing. You're saying that quality business conversations deserve a platform. You're saying substance matters over hype, and you're saying this mission is worth building. So if this resonates with you, help me reach others like you. Subscribe, follow, share, whatever works for wherever you are. You're helping build something substantial from the ground up, and I genuinely appreciate it. So thank you. And now back to the show. Neri Sillaman, welcome to Business Unbound.
Hi, Florian. Very nice to see you again.
Neri, your story is truly fascinating. And let's go back to the beginning of your journey. Can you walk us through the early chapters of your life and, well, how your family eventually came to be in Istanbul?
Sure. As you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I was born in Bulgaria to a Turkish ethnic minority family, and it was during communism in the 1980s. At the time, there was the Communist Party decided to carry out an ethnic assimilation process, which meant our names will be changed. Those who rejected that or didn't want to do it were either imprisoned or in some cases, unfortunately, they were also killed. So my entire childhood, even though it was a happy childhood, and I remember it as that, was unfortunately spent with this feeling of being the other, of knowing very early on as a child that something was wrong with me. I internalize it, of course, when you are a child. You know that something is going on because with my family, we also tried to run away, to hide. Our Bulgarian neighbors, friends will hide us in their homes. And this sounds unbelievable because it didn't happen that long ago. It happened in the 1980s. And in June of 1989, the communist dictator Todor Zhivkov came on TV and basically announced that anyone who has Turkish, who feels Turkish and who is Turkish needs to leave the country. And you can only take what you can carry with you. And we left. We took 2 suitcases. And we ended up, when you leave, at the time, you don't have phones. Even in our home growing up, we didn't even have a landline. We ended up at the border and we were set up to stay at a refugee camp, which was set up by the Red Cross. So I started life in these very dire circumstances. And I do talk about that because that's a very important moment, pivotal moment in my life, because it shaped who I am today. Because as I stood at that border as an 11-year-old, I made a decision that the way out of this will be if I get a good education. And recently, I was at Thinkers 50 a few weeks ago. Ranjay Gulati, who wrote the book about courage, said courage is making a decision. And I couldn't agree more with this statement because even as an 11-year-old, I stood at that border and made a decision. I will need to get a good education. And it defines everything I do today. We started a business later on, but even that business has education in its heart because it wouldn't exist if I didn't have the education. I'm the only one in my family to speak English, to have gone on to university. And later on, I'm not even talking about PhD and everything else. But the way we set up the business, because I went to study at University of Miami on financial aid in 1996. And I graduated in 2.5 years, but towards the end of my education, and even during my education, the idea for the business was born. And so everything that happened in that moment when I stood at the border with 2 suitcases to our names and said, I have to get an education.
And there are certainly no two opinions about that. What happened was truly horrific. Now, you were quite young at this age, and then you arrived in Turkey. What do you recall about how you as a family navigated those first few years in this new country and how eventually you slowly but gradually transitioned into business? What do you recall?
I think family is not just this concept of, 4 people, mother, father, my brother, and me. It was actually the extended family as well. To be able to get out of the refugee camp, my dad went into this office at the border, and they have, the yellow pages of Turkey. And he tracked down his aunt. And when I say aunt, this is not directly his aunt, but everyone, when you come from the kind of culture where I come from, Turkish culture, it's a very collective culture. So everyone is your family. So he tracked her, and he told her, we are at a refugee camp, we are in a tent, we are immigrating, we became refugees. And she opened her home not just to us but to 5 other families. So we lived in her home for about 3-4 months until my parents were able to find jobs, and they found jobs, any jobs. My mom worked at a textile factory, my dad worked in construction, illegal cab driver, anything to be able to afford rent, basically. And eventually we were able to afford rent, but of course it wasn't in this fancy place. It was in this rough and rundown neighborhood of Istanbul. I recall not having any water. The place that we rented didn't have any running water, no electricity, no heat. At some point, I remember, this is also quite a core memory, my mom burning shoes that we no longer wore, clothes that we no longer wore, just to be able to heat the house. When I say house, it was a small apartment, just to be able to heat this apartment that we were renting. So it was very challenging, but I think those challenges bring you together, and we stuck together as a family. When I say family, again, it's the extended family, supporting each other and knowing you are in this together. And there is no way, you know, it's almost like, there is no going back and you have to keep going. So there's certainly that mindset of, we have to stick together. We know we are in the mud and we have to keep going. You can go back. It's not an option.
It's relatively difficult for me to understand what this must have meant for you personally and for your family. I mean, I've grown up in relative privilege in comparison. So I find it very remarkable what shaped you and what impacted you back in the days, and what it must have been for a feeling to go through this as a family. And I mean, eventually your family did transition into business.
Yes.
How did that all come about?
It's a story I explore in detail in my book as well. It's a long story. It came about because when we were living in Bulgaria, my father met a Turkish guy vacationing in Bulgaria. That's like meeting a unicorn, because this is a closed economy, it's communism. People from Turkey and other neighboring countries are not really allowed. But he was passing through from Germany. He stopped in Bulgaria, and we were on a beach. And I was singing a Turkish song, and he approached us and said, "Are you Turks?" And this is like, in Bulgaria, you're not allowed to have Turkish names. You're not allowed to speak in Turkish. Meeting someone from Turkey for us was wow. And he told us that he owned a leather factory, a leather workshop, atelier in Turkey, gave his business card to my dad, and said to him, "If you ever end up in Turkey, give me a call." So that's a crazy thing, Florian, but my dad took that business card, saved it for many years, and took it with him. In the 2 suitcases that we had, there was also that business card that he kept, but he didn't call him right away after we immigrated. So he went back to Turkey when the communism collapsed right after we immigrated in Bulgaria. Todor Zhivkov was put in jail. He was, it's a complicated history there as well. But we were finally allowed to go back to Bulgaria. My dad sold our house in Bulgaria. And he's not allowed to bring the money back, but he's allowed to bring it in products. So he bought a motorcycle, he bought a car, and with the money that he saved, that money, it wasn't that much, but he recognized an opportunity, which was people from neighboring former communist country coming to Turkey to sell to find any goods to buy. And my dad's idea was, if I sell leather products to former Soviet countries, it's going to work. He has never been an entrepreneur in his life. He worked in construction in Bulgaria. And that's when he gave a call to the Turkish guy and said to him, I have a proposal. Do you remember me? I'm not here to ask for a job, but I have an idea for you. I'm, of course, shortening the story. And the rest is history. My dad started to sell his leather products and make commission out of them. I was at the time 15 years old when we turned a little apartment in the Grand Bazaar area of Istanbul. And my idea was put up a sign outside that said, please come in for a homeland cup of coffee, to signal to the people from Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, we are like you. It's a homeland cup of coffee. And believe it or not, that's how we built our business. And I again talk about it in my book because this is homophilic ties. I explored it in my academic research as well after I had gone on to do my PhD. And around that time, I started to take the Turkish company, my father, to Italy, to UK. Nobody spoke English or Italian, but I did. So I worked as a translator. And that's when I discovered how the leather industry really works, where the best suppliers of leather products are, where the top suppliers of leather skins are, how it all works. And we started to form relationships with our Italian suppliers because when we would visit the trade fair, and by the way, we had no idea about them. I remember going as a 16-year-old to these trade fairs, translating, taking notes, and starting as early as 8 a.m. in the morning, non-stop, till 11 in the evening, because we would also go for dinner, visiting every single stand, asking questions, discovering. And I will fall asleep. My mom reminds me of that as well. I fell asleep with my shoes on. I was so exhausted. Just to tell you, none of us knew anything about the leather industry, but it takes a tremendous amount of dedication and work and curiosity. And at the age of 18, I go to University of Miami, and I realized that the companies that we all love and adore, most of them have been started by immigrants at some point. And that's when my entire mindset shifted, because even though I was very focused on my studies, I've always carried this shame of being the other. This started as early as in Bulgaria. I knew I was different. At least people told me so. People told me my name was wrong. People told me my religion, my language was wrong. And you internalize that, and I certainly did. And I felt imposter syndrome. I felt doubt. But then in Miami, when I discovered, and I start the book with that, when I discovered that Andrew Grove, the person who makes the computers work, was an immigrant, was a refugee just like me, it shifted. Representation matters, because I thought, wow, they came here with no money. The founder of Nordstrom, the fashion retailer, he's a refugee. Levi's, Procter and Gamble, all refugees, all immigrants. And for me, this was gold. I don't think at the time I thought one day I'm going to write a book about immigrant entrepreneurs. But what helped me is that I started to shift my thinking that I am different to my difference is good. My difference can be a good thing.
And Neri, we will explore your research and your work further in just a moment. Just for our audience members, can you tell us the business that your co-parents founded? It's obviously named after you, Neri Karra. How big is it today?
We have a factory. We employ 175 craftsmen in our factory, and we produce our own label, and as well as the label of, as you mentioned, Prada, 𝐘𝐚𝐭. We have produced for Brioni, we have produced for Gucci, Versace, Armani, Karl Lagerfeld, the brand Karl Lagerfeld, which is the Germany-based one. So we are 25 years in business. Majority of the people that we employ, especially in the management, are our family. So the aunt who opened her door to us, her husband worked in our factory until retirement. Her son is the factory manager, and her daughter is our accountant. So it's a full circle moment, a very meaningful one in some sense. So yes, this is, it's a family business. And how it started is that we were making commission. My father was making commission from the products that he was selling, but this was not our brand. My mom worked at a factory as a cleaner. My uncles drove trucks. This was not, we were still renting a nicer apartment, but this was not a family business. This was not our business. And you still have to not pinch pennies, but your decisions are made by someone else. You do not get to make the decision for yourself. And when I returned to Turkey, I have to be honest with you, I returned because I felt very alone in the States. I was by myself. I had the option to continue my MBA, and I got an entry-level job at Morgan Stanley. I almost said McKinsey, but it was Morgan Stanley. And it was great, it would be a very good first step for me. But at the same time, I felt very lost and lonely, to be honest with you. And I went back to Turkey, and I told my parents, why don't we start our own company, our own brand? And here is how we can do it. We have the suppliers in Italy, and I know that they have this leather that they don't use because it has a small defect, or it's out of season, or something happened during the coloring process that, other big brands are not willing to buy that leather anymore. And this leather is going to be discarded. So why don't we go to them and ask if they can sell this leather to us for cheaper, or if they are completely throwing it away, maybe we can take it. And we know the best craftsmen who also are immigrants like us. Maybe they can create a small collection for us with just wallets, and at the time Nokia was very popular, mobile phone cases. And we have distributors in Russia, in Ukraine. Maybe we can approach them. And for example, in Russia, we had a huge distributor. Because my father was making commission out of the brand, but he actually set up a distribution network in Russia himself by building the relationships with people like us who also were coming from communism.
It's really interesting. And I like to explore further what you hinted towards a few times, this immigrant entrepreneur advantage, let's call it like this.
Yeah.
And you hold a PhD from Cambridge University. You have devoted a significant amount of your academic research to the intersection of immigration and entrepreneurship. Can you tell us what your research revealed?
My research started at Cambridge more than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I went to do my PhD. And I became curious about international entrepreneurship, born global firms that became global from inception without having any operation in their local market, because the business literature always says in order to become a well-known business, a successful business, you first have to establish yourself in your local market. But that's not what we have done. We have never, to this day, we have never done any business in Turkey. We do not sell our products in Turkey. We employ people in Turkey in our factory, but everything is outside, for the outside market. And as I am getting curious about that one aspect of it, because I use my company as a case study, is of course the role of ethnic entrepreneurship. And I started my initial research revealed what we call homophilic ties. People, especially immigrant entrepreneurs, they use what we call homophilic ties, people who are like you. Let's, not complicated. People who are like you, and you would think they will reach out to people who come from their own culture or background, but that's not the case. They are very strategic about that. You don't have to necessarily come from the same culture as the person, but they are going to use the sameness. They will find something that is common, and they do it in a very strategic way. So if they go out there to build a business and they will meet a supplier or a manufacturer, they will try to find commonality with that person. And it's not to trick the other person. No, it happens in a very deliberate, in a very strategic and authentic way, because we are both in this together. That's the mindset. And we have shared values. We have shared understanding of how we want to do this business. And they will also give trust. Trust is a very big word here. Like, I'm reminded, like in my book, of Isaac Larian, who is the founder of MGA Entertainment. He's a billionaire. He became an immigrant at the age of 17 from Iran to US. And he comes to US with $700 in his pocket, knows nobody at all in US, and eventually puts himself to school, starts an electronics company, wants to bring Nintendo to US, goes to Japan, and he is rejected multiple times. Nintendo doesn't want to do business with him. They don't want to give him the rights.
Right.
Every single day he goes to the office. Every single day he's told no. Just they are like, please go back. I mean, we are not interested. But eventually he opens $1 million line of credit and goes back again. So there is this, to get someone to trust you. In Turkey we have a saying, they will also put their hand under the rock to say, like, I am taking, and they will be willing to take a bigger risk in order to say, I'm very serious about doing business with you, and to signal to the other person, we are in this together.
And to summarize some of the findings from your research, I think I read somewhere that, you identified that nearly 50% of Fortune 500 companies were actually founded by immigrants, and 80% of billion-dollar US startups, so companies valued above $1 billion, have immigrant founders, or at least immigrant leadership.
Yeah.
Your research culminated into your book, Pioneers, 8 Principles of Business Longevity from Immigrant Entrepreneurs. Can you, on a high level, walk us through these principles?
Absolutely. So the first one is, they have cross-cultural understanding. Obviously, they come from a different culture, and what that means is they will look at a problem from a different perspective. That's one thing. Second, as we know, when you start to do business, there is the institutional environment, let's say the institutional framework of US is going to be very different than the institutional framework of Iran or Russia. But immigrant entrepreneurs, because they almost act as a bridge between two different countries. And in most cases, they will reduce that institutional distance because they have been exposed to both cultures and they know the risks. They know how to reduce that risk. And but as I said, in some cases, they also are able to come up with a powerful business idea because their cross-cultural understanding allows them to look at a problem or a potential opportunity from a different perspective that someone from the local culture will not necessarily be able to identify it. I gave in the book the example of cronut. It's a powerful example because it's an actual product. It's a cross between croissant and donut. And it was started by Dominique Ancel. He has a very well-known bakery in New York. And he comes from France, born to a very poor family. He immigrated to New York, started to work at a famous Michelin restaurant, and takes this big risk to start his own bakery. It's a huge risk. And in the early days,
it is, yeah.
He's doing everything himself, from wiring the electricity of the bakery, cleaning. He says he slept only 3 to 4 hours the first few months of starting the business. And then one day it's going to be Mother's Day, and his girlfriend says to him, "You are French, we live in US. Why don't you combine two popular pastries, donut and croissant?" And the result is cronut, which puts him on the map, and he becomes, extremely well known overnight almost. But when I say overnight, it's years of work. So go ahead.
This was the second principle, right? This was the second principle.
This was still the first, first principle. Still cross-cultural bridging, because you are able to bridge two cultures, but that has so many components to it, because it's not just as simple as saying you are going to look at a problem from a different perspective. So the second one is, and I have the book here with me. I can tell you exactly how I've titled them. The second one is about vision, how you create a powerful vision for your company. Because often when immigrant entrepreneurs move to a different country, what allows them to succeed or to keep going forward is to be able to have a very clear vision. And they are able to do that not because they look into the future, but this is a very important distinction. Their past is what informs their business idea. And they are able to create that business idea because they almost create it from the future back. And today the same principle is employed by Moderna. Stéphane Bancel, who is the CEO of Moderna, also says the most powerful tool that they use at Moderna, he uses, is to create from the future back. So you have an idea, you know what you want to do, and you take, what do I need? What needs to happen now in order for that to become a reality? And I titled it Build from the Past Forward and the Future Back.
Interesting.
And yes. And I go into a great detail. I introduce in the book what we call 3I framework, and to help anyone who reads the book, regardless of whether they come from an immigrant background or not, to create a powerful vision for themselves. The third one, which I've been hinting from the very beginning, is forging connections based on your identity and authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's homophilic ties. Because, as I said, there is when they move to a different country, the immigrant entrepreneurs tend to lose all the ties, all the social capital they had back at home. But often they will be able to, as it happened in our case, build a business based on social ties. We were able to build our initial business, even building the business of our Turkish partner, because we emphasized with our suppliers, with our manufacturers, with our distributors, our commonality and our shared purpose. So the fourth one is generating profit the right way, because when I say this, especially, as you know, Floriana, I work with startups, they immediately say, but I need profit. And with this principle, it doesn't mean immigrant entrepreneurs started a business by saying, I do not want to earn any profit from my business. But what I'm trying to say here, they were not driven by profit alone. In fact, several of them have failed tremendously previously. Almost all of them have some sort of a failure example. None of the entrepreneurs I talked to created these fantastic businesses out of the blue overnight. They have had challenges and failures. And what was interesting, especially in Tope Avotona's case, he wanted to become an entrepreneur and he really wanted to make money. But only when he was driven by solving a genuine problem that was affecting him, he was able to create Calendly. So generating profit the right way means being focused on solving a problem, being aware that you exist only because of other people, your suppliers, your distributors, your entire ecosystem. And that's why the next principle, building a community, matters greatly. It's your social capital. In building a community, I talk about the example of Chobani, 𝐘𝐚𝐭, who built the yogurt brand Chobani, and he was only able to do that because he relied on the community. When he took over the abandoned craft factory in Ithaca, New York, everyone thought there is no way. How can Kraft bankrupt and not be able to make this into a business success? Who are you to think that you will come here with no business experience in US, an immigrant from Turkey, and think you can revive this factory? He was able to do that because he relied on the community. That entire hamlet, that entire town, actually, their livelihood was the craft factory. And instead of hiring outside consultants, instead of thinking, I know the answer best, he went to the people who worked at that factory and he created the product with them. To this day, community is his biggest strategic advantage in the business. And principle 6 is reframing rejection. I mentioned about Isaac Larian. I hinted to that as well, because how he was able to...
You did, yeah.
They won't take no for an answer. In fact, no is the beginning of negotiation. No is when the business starts. And to them, it was they reframe their past, they reframe rejection, they reframe failure. Immigrant entrepreneurs are very powerful at reframing what happens to them, including hearing no. When they hear no, they say, aha, I am onto something. So I give many of these powerful examples, and if you read the book, you will see I didn't write a typical business book, but instead I take you into the world of Hamdi Ulukaya, Haim Saban, Tope Avotona. You are right in there with them. And principle 7 is fry in your own oil, and the last principle is about luck.
Let's stick with principle 6 for a moment. Frying in your own oil.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Frying your own oil is about becoming self-sufficient, but it doesn't mean you shut yourself off to the world. To fry in your own oil, it's a Turkish saying, 𝐘𝐨𝐿𝐴. It's something that my grandfather used to really say to me growing up, because I come from a very poor family, and we had to be self-reliant. We had to grow our own vegetables, fruits, our own meat. It was communism anyway, so anyone who comes from that part of the world will relate to this. You are almost forced to be self-reliant, but that self-reliant doesn't mean you close yourself off to the world. It means you work together. Your neighbor becomes your partner. Same thing in business. Frying in your own oil means you look at your own family and say, how can we work in this together? How can we do the very best with what we have? For example, our business doesn't have outside investors. We never took on an investor. We are still a completely self-funded family business. Now 25 years.
Entirely
bootstrapped to this day. And that to me is sustainability, because you really become very creative, but it really, Florian, allows you to identify, in business we talk about, you will be very familiar coming from Oxford. What is your sustainable competitive advantage? I think this is strategy 101. Everyone, you sit at your desk, you sit in the classroom, that's what you will hear on day one. But it's not just something that stays in a classroom. I have lived this again and again, and frying in your own oil, in my opinion, it's very linked to having a sustainable competitive advantage. When you don't go to outside investors to almost, save you from a financial challenge, you are able to, I'm speaking from experience, you are able to understand what it is that makes you the only. What are your strengths? At the same time, what are your weaknesses? And how can you, in a very sustainable way, strengthen that weakness? What do you have at your disposal? And to me, this is frying in your own oil.
Okay, that's understood. It's a very, very interesting concept. And what is the final one? You mentioned luck.
Yes. So this is interesting one. I was very surprised because as I was coding my interviews that I've done with the immigrant entrepreneurs, I noticed that every single one of them, without me asking them anything about luck, talks about luck. They will say, oh, I was lucky I met my wife. I was lucky I met my business partner. Oh, I was lucky the product took off. I was lucky I did it at the right time. So I explored it further, and as you dive into it further, luck to immigrant entrepreneurs doesn't mean it's a lucky event that happens to them outside of their control, but instead they use luck in a very strategic way. And they create their own luck. They create the lucky moments. Like, I told you about my father keeping the business cards, going to that guy at the right time with a proposal. Creating your own luck means identifying a need in the market. It means identifying the right people. It means you take a chance, you take a risk, you knock at the door and say, here, I have this idea. What do you think about it? And yes, circumstances, of course, there's always a luck factor. But if you were not prepared for it, if you didn't recognize it, it can pass you by. So that's the difference. They are very, very astute and very aware, very switched on in identifying what luck is, what lucky moment is, and how to turn that into luck. They work very hard for that luck to happen. So it's not something that just boom, by magic appears. So in that chapter, I also, at the end of every chapter, I have actionable steps that anyone can take and how to create your own luck. At the end of every single principle, I created 10 or 15 different ways on how anyone can also become more lucky.
So I've noted down the different elements that you explained, and just for our audience, they were cross-cultural perspectives, vision, forging connections, generating profit the right way, building a community, reframing rejection, frying in your own oil, and the final one was luck. And Neri, we mentioned earlier, your research identified that, 50% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants, but it also means that 50% of Fortune 500 companies were not founded by immigrants. And I'm trying to get to, not everyone shares this immigrant background. So for leaders or aspiring entrepreneurs who are not immigrants, to what extent do you believe that the elements and the mindset shift that you have identified can still be applied or replicated?
Very much so. I wrote the book. Another important statistic here is that statistically, immigrant-founded businesses last longer than those founded by natives. And in a world where 90% of startups fail, when we look at these very striking statistics, we see there is something different here that has not been explored. So in the literature of immigrant entrepreneurship, everyone talks about why are immigrants more likely to become entrepreneurs? And this is very much true. I mean, in the US, immigrants actually make up only 13% of the US population, but 23% of its entrepreneurs. Huge statistic again. So I wanted to understand this is about business longevity. Nobody has asked the question or made the connection. Why are immigrants more likely to start businesses that last? And yes, of course, it applies to non-immigrant businesses because these are all principles that all of us can apply. And that's why I wrote it. My audience actually was not immigrant entrepreneurs or immigrants, but I used them as a case study in order to see how we can create businesses of sustainability, businesses of longevity, businesses that do not only chase profit, do not only look into constant growth. Because, Florian, from where I stand, how our industry and businesses in general have been going, it cannot continue, and it will not. I am adamant about this point. We need to change about how we think about business. Constant profitability, constant growth, it is simply not sustainable.
So basically you're saying you look at the population of immigrant founders and their companies, you identify what they have in common, and then say, those elements that you identified, let's apply them to the wider business community as a whole.
Yes, you can absolutely think about generating profit the right way, building with your community, realizing and recognizing your business doesn't exist separate from the ecosystem you are part of. You are very much part of, and immigrant entrepreneurs know this because they come from countries where there is tremendous amount of instability. They left because they couldn't stay in the countries where they come from. And they have seen what a country with a weak ecosystem can do. There becomes a civil war and so on.
And let's try to make this even more concrete. So imagine that you're speaking to a business leader in a corporate career, in a corporate life, and this business leader may feel stuck. And based on what you've just explained, what is the like immigrant mindset shift that they can apply tomorrow to regain a sense of agency and responsibility, even in a corporate life?
I think step one is recognizing, there is this hero complex, I think I see quite often, where, and this is the contrast I've seen, immigrant entrepreneurs who have built these exceptional businesses, they never saw themselves as, it's a paradox. They don't see them, there is humility there. They do not see themselves as the center of the business, as the leader who everyone comes for answers. Of course, they are the ones who created this company, but they also have the humility to say, I don't have all the answers. And let me go out into my community, let me ask my employees. And having that understanding, that humility, that you are not going to have the answer for everything. Know that you are part of a bigger ecosystem. And that's quite a concrete thing, by the way. Know that you are in this with your suppliers, with your employees, with your manufacturers, with everyone, including nature, is part of your ecosystem. And when you are making decisions, recognize that all the elements have to be put into consideration.
Based on your background, you see business from different perspectives. There's the research that you have done, then you're an entrepreneurship expert at the University of Oxford, and you run your own company and have intimate knowledge of business operations firsthand. From your perspective, what do you find is the biggest difference between business theory and then business reality?
Oh, gosh, there is... I think I wouldn't say the business theories do not apply to business, because I like how the two inform each other. Some of my best work has come because I was able to, I am dealing with a problem in the business or in everyday life. So the reason why I wrote the PhD, my entire PhD, is based on my company. So the two, in my opinion, are very much connected. And that's how they are I do business and I write my articles. I can separate theory from practice. At the same time, it's not the same thing, because I think it's a little bit safer and easier, quote unquote, to write about a problem, to write about a challenge. But then you have to actively be in it. You have to talk to an employer who is having a health challenge, just to give you an example, or, your distributor of many years decides to leave you. And what's next? How you deal with that in real life, it's very different than how you will write about it.
And in your capacity, obviously, you work with startups and entrepreneurs. You're an entrepreneurship expert at the University of Oxford. And when founders come to you for advice, when they are starting out, what is the first thing that you typically tell them to look at?
A healthy financial balance. I think this is number one. Frying in your own oil concept applies here very much. You have to have a very good business product or service that is able to generate revenue, profit on its own, without you needing to go outside for any outside investment. This is number one. Cash is, profit is important. And again, I do not say profit is not important, but profit, when you focus on an actual problem that you can solve, that you want to solve, profit comes. And that's why I talk about profit the right way, because I had a student, not at Oxford, at 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐶, who decided to start a company by buying things from Alibaba, I think it was Alibaba, and selling them at ×9 profit margin. And he said to me, yes, he said to me, you are teaching us about this and that, but I'm making money and it's selling, but it doesn't mean it lasted long. You know what I mean? That's why profit the right way. That's a very simple, sustainable profit over time. Because if you're, and I say with a caveat in the preface of my book, if your idea is to generate profit day after day or year after year after year, this book is not for you. But if you want to create a business that you are proud of, business of impact, business of legacy, at the end of the day, you say, it was all worth it, then this book is for you. Because that's what it's about, long-term thinking. It's the long game. Nothing is going to come easy. And I'm sorry to break it to everyone, but at least this is my experience and this is what I've seen in my research. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted.
And as you look at the next generation of entrepreneurs, do you see a change of their definition of success? Does success in entrepreneurship mean something else now as it did a couple of years or decades ago?
I don't know. I'm hopeful, I would say that. So I'm hopeful, Florian, especially because of Oxford and Oxford students, really. I have been very impressed, even when for your coursework at entrepreneurship projects, you have to come up with business ideas. And now I am advising startups that come out of Oxford, and they are very much focused on solving a problem that impacts society in general. So that for me already is a huge, and of course, I wouldn't say I'm biased, but I am quite optimistic. I am quite optimistic because of the youth, because of Oxford and the educational institutions and what I see is happening there.
That sounds very positive and exciting. And let's end on this high note. Let's slowly start wrapping up our discussion. There is a closing tradition on this podcast, and there are two questions that I would still like to ask you. What or who is inspiring you right now? I mean, is there a leader, a book, an idea, or something else that is expanding your thinking at the moment that is inspiring you?
Well, I am very inspired by my colleagues who are part of Thinkers 50. And, I was there. I was very lucky and honored to win the Radar Award. But everyone is doing such exceptional work. Again, it's about being focused on the future. For right now, everything seems so cynical. There is all these challenges and tremendous change and problems that we are all facing as humanity. Yet when I look at my colleagues and the work that they do, I'm very inspired and very encouraged to see where everything is going.
Is there someone or something in particular which stands out for you, which you remember top of your head?
Of course.
Like one of the...
Many. Francis Frey, Ranjay Gulati, who wrote the book on courage, fantastic article at HBR as well. Amy Edmondson, one of my all-time, I don't want to use the word hero, but I really like how she conducts her research and how she is as a professor, as a thinker. Rita McGrath. The list is endless. The list is endless, really. But I was particularly moved by Frances Frey's lecture as well. She talked about ambition and resilience. And I was very moved by that because it felt almost like a sermon in some ways. And she has just came out of radiation therapy. So there was also that personal element to it. But some time ago, I was asked, how ambitious are you? And I was asked this question in a little bit of a negative way, like as if ambition is a bad thing. And I said, I am very ambitious. And I'm very grateful that I am ambitious, because I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have ambition. And Frances Frey talked about her, cancer recovery journey. And she said, you are able to be resilient because you are ambitious, because you have ambition. I am shortening the whole lecture. She's absolutely brilliant. And it was very moving, very moving.
Now, and Neri, if our listeners, our audience members remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, or one action that they should take today, what would you want that to be?
I think keep going. In life, in business, you are always going to be faced with challenges. Keep going while you value every single person who is with you on your journey. Let's remember that to keep going doesn't mean you are in it by yourself. You are on a journey, you are moving on a path, but you are not alone. And remember and appreciate and value the people who are there for you and who are there with you.
Then, Neri Karra Sillaman, thank you very much for this conversation, and until next time.
Thank you, Florian. It was a pleasure.
Before we wrap up, let me highlight what I believe are the key masterclass level insights from this conversation. The central takeaway today is the universal application of the immigrant mindset. Neri made a critical point. You don't need to be coming from an immigrant background to apply some of the key mindset advantages. The principles she identified, like reframing rejection, are strategic choices, not personality traits. Successful immigrant founders don't hear no as a stop sign. They hear it as the start of a negotiation. For any corporate leader or entrepreneur feeling stuck, adopting this mindset where obstacles are just data points rather than dead ends, this is the fastest way to regain a sense of agency. And while all 8 principles are powerful, what stands out to me is the concept of creating from the future back. Founders like the CEO of Moderna use their past to envision a specific future and then work backward to solve the gaps. This turns vision from a buzzword into a reverse engineering process, allowing you to build with clarity even in unstable environments. Ultimately, the most empowering insight is that these 8 principles, they are truly universal, whether you are an immigrant founder or a corporate leader without an immigrant background. Adopting a mindset where rejection is just data and luck is engineered is a great way to build something that lasts. Now, thanks for listening. This was Business Unbound for today, and until next time. Now, a few final words. If this conversation resonated with you, whether you're looking to apply the immigrant advantage to your own leadership style, whether you're curious about how to build a business, or whether you're simply looking for honest insights on how to turn constraints into competitive advantages, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. You can also head over to our website, businessunbound.co. That's where you will find links to everything we discussed today, including Neri's book, Pioneers, and a full list of the 8 principles. And while you're visiting our website, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter to get notified the moment new episodes air. You'll be the first to know when we are dropping conversations with the next wave of forward-thinking leaders who are building companies, scaling teams, and challenging conventional wisdom about what it takes to succeed. Now, thanks for listening. This was Business Unbound for today, and until next time.